Anakin Skywalker is one of the main characters of the Star Wars saga, and that comes with some pretty nice benefits. Alongside lifelong comprehensive healthcare coverage, among those benefits is the fact that he seems to get knighted at least 3 or 4 different times between Legends and canon. Today we're going to break down those different accounts of his knighthood. 3 of them placed his knighthood fairly early in the war, and 1 very late, which was then retconned to being very early. The first depiction, or at least account, of Anakin becoming a Jedi Knight is the one which takes place the latest in terms of original intent, and that's the account given in Jedi Trial by David Sherman and Dan Craig. In this novel, Jedi Master Nejah Halcyon is tasked with a mission to the planet Praesitlin, and to the surprise of the Council, when asked to choose a deputy, he picks Anakin Skywalker, who is not yet a Jedi Knight. In the original intent for the timeline, this book took place in around 19.5 BBY, or years before the Battle of Yavin, so a relatively short time before the end of the war in its final year. The Jedi Council is surprised by his choice, and they kinda try to nudge him into taking basically anyone but Anakin, but ultimately they leave the choice up to him, and it becomes an unofficial trial for both Anakin and Master Halcyon. With the guidance of Nejah, Anakin comes to the understanding that this mission is being treated by the Council as a trial. Both of them share a similar secret as well, and unfortunately for them, they both seem to have set their Facebook status as being in a relationship, meaning Halcyon had reason to suspect that Yoda knew not just about his own secret, but about Anakin's marriage to Padme as well, which Anakin had confided in him a little bit earlier in the same conversation. They ultimately accomplish their mission, prove themselves to be devoted to their roles as Jedi, and this gets treated by the Jedi Council as Anakin having been successful in his trials. Mace and Yoda decide that upon Anakin's return, he would be invested as a Jedi Knight and officially allowed to get a haircut. We get a fairly different take on his path to knighthood in the animated series as presented by Genndy Tartakovsky between chapters 21 and 22 of the original micro-series. These episodes released in March 2005, while Jedi Trial released in October 2004. So they include the first and second half of the Battle of Hypori and the introduction of General Grievous, where he pretty much demolishes several very experienced Jedi, including current council members Ki-Adi-Mundi and Shaak Ti, future Grand Master within Luke's Order Kakruk, as well as Jedi Knights Aayla Secura, Tarsir, and Shag Yi. He had already killed another Jedi named Dachman Barrack. Grievous kills or knocks most of them out of commission before Fordo's troops rescue them and extract them back to Coruscant. Once on Coruscant, the following scene in Chapter 21 shows the Council discussing the need for more knights in the specific context of Ki-Adi-Mundi explaining the threat posed by General Grievous and talking about how he has changed the shape of the war. So I think every context clue here points to the fact that this scene is happening right after the Battle of Hypori. Obi-Wan says that given the need for more knights, Anakin should be knighted, and they should forego the typical need for the trials to expedite that process. Some members of the Council, in particular Master Oppo Rancisis, are outraged at the idea that Anakin could skip the trials. Obi-Wan explains that in a sense, Anakin has passed the trials. He's passed the trial of skill by defeating Ventress on Yavin 4, whom he references as that dark assassin, despite him calling her by name and knowing her pretty well in material set much later in the war, a trial of the flesh, getting his arm chopped off by Dooku, and then every test of courage the war had dealt him. Yoda ultimately agrees with Obi-Wan and says that Anakin's trials will be unorthodox just like the rest of his career. We then see Anakin get knighted, making his knighthood far earlier in the timeline than the Jedi trial depiction. The Battle of Hypori, by all accounts, takes place in 22 BBY, within the first few months after the Battle of Geonosis. This places it several years before the Jedi Trial novel, where Yoda and Mace decide to take the Praesitlin mission as being Anakin's trial. But there's a convenient time jump right after Anakin's knighthood, with the next chapter, chapter 22, so episode 22 in the micro-series, opening up with Anakin and Obi-Wan winning the Battle of Bomis-Kori 4 by courageously liking this video and subscribing for more. This time jump offered a pretty simple way to deal with the inconsistency. Instead of the time jump occurring between the end of chapter 21 and 22, as was originally intended, Leland Shee, keeper of the Holocron Continuity Database, said that the time jump would officially be set between the Battle of Hypori and the Council meeting, rather than after the knighting, saying that details which remained out of whack like Anakin's hair are explained by him just having it in a top knot. To be clear, I find this to be a perfectly reasonable retcon, regardless of the strangeness it introduces in the conversation, and the fact that the details of how they decide he's ready are fairly different from the account we get in Jedi Trial. The overall timeline just gels better if you shift that meeting back to be consistent with Jedi Trial, and each story is its own story, so they stand perfectly fine on their own. I think any analysis of Star Wars has to understand that it's a broader mythos with interconnected stories where, regardless of my preference to look at it as a bigger historical timeline, the priority for each story is on itself rather than on the broader picture. I have seen claims that the council scene in the cartoon was always supposed to be set later in the war, but aside from the context clues like Obi-Wan and Anakin's hair, the fact that they're talking about Grievous emerging and shaping the course of the war, which was clearly referring to a battle that we had just seen, the time jump being intended as being after the Knighthood was confirmed by Tartakovsky in the commentary for the series, so in the words of LeVar Burton, you don't have to take my word for it. They talk about some of the themes of the show, including this kind of generalized trial for Anakin, hence Obi-Wan recounting the prior events as being more onerous than standard trials, and then when Bomus Corey comes up, they specifically say it's been a big time jump since he got knighted. Here's the full clip.
It was very happy. And here we reveal them in their episode 3 gear.
So it's been a big time jump since he got knighted, so time has transpired. He's, Anakin's being amazing. It's a montage of him being totally cool.
So this whole montage is about
Sassy Tin's horn is growing
most
back.
of the war.
Yeah.
Like these
just
2 minutes are
These 2
probably
minutes
like 2 years worth of the Clone Wars.
Yeah,
So.
because we didn't want to repeat what we've done already and show more Clone Wars. We had this whole other story that we wanted to get into.
So Leland Chee made the one change, and everything seemed fine with the late war interpretation. But then George decided he wanted to make a new show, and we opened the Clone Wars animated series, having Anakin not just already knighted, but with George having given Anakin a Padawan. Ahsoka may be most associated with Dave Filoni, and as a character he did the most to develop her, but it was George's decision to give him a Padawan here, and so this once again means that Anakin's knighthood got changed to sometime within the first 6-ish months of the war. So, funnily enough, despite Leland's initial retcon being to put the time jump earlier while keeping Jedi Trial where it was, the way that later Legends material ended up dealing with bridging some of the contradictions with the newer 2008 cartoon was by compressing the multimedia project timeline for most of its material where it was necessary. Luckily for the original cartoon, most of the first 21 chapters happen before the 2008 show actually starts anyways, and the final few chapters of the original micro-series are mostly centered around the lead up to the Battle of Coruscant, so there's a lot of the war that just wasn't included in that series, and there's a bit more freedom in there. But for books like Jedi Trial, they were more severely adjusted. The Essential Reader's Companion stated that the knighting for Anakin was within the first 4 weeks after Geonosis, moving Jedi Trial up by several years, and thereby still compressing the original cartoon probably more than it really needed to be to fit with the new series, in my opinion. So the events of Jedi Trial and the micro-series were still put together, it's just instead of being united under the Jedi Trial timeline, they were kind of closer to the original micro-series timeline, and kind of subject to whatever changes the Clone Wars cartoon in 2008 wanted to make. Since the 2008 cartoon was one of the pieces of media maintained as part of the continuity when the reboot happened under Disney, the early war knighting was kept, but the specifics in both Jedi Trial and the micro-series were not kept. For most of these different iterations on Anakin's knighthood, except the micro-series, it's discussed as a thing that has happened or is going to happen, rather than being directly depicted. So it's mostly the timeline that changes, while the specific events of the micro-series tend to be kept intact in the broader lore. You might expect this would change with the new canon, but surprisingly it actually doesn't really. Anakin's knighthood, as far as I know, isn't depicted in any other canon novel or source yet, so it's most directly discussed in Brotherhood by Mike Chen. Chen was a big fan of many parts of the original multimedia project, like Labyrinth of Evil, so when Brotherhood does mention certain specific events, like the knighting or the certain business on Cadonia Moidia, a lot of the details that he mentions are pulled from that media, albeit with the post-2008 cartoon shift to the timeline. So when details of things like the knighting come up, there are some direct references to events in the micro-series. For example, Anakin giving his Padawan braid to Padme, which comes from the show. There's an email from Mike Chen on Wikipedia directly talking about how he still referenced these microseries events, although he treated them more as a HoloNet dramatization rather than a direct accounting of the Clone Wars. So in the end, we have 4 different kind of timelines for Anakin's knighting. The intent of Jedi trial late in the War in Legends, the intent in the animated series being earlier in the war, which was then adapted to the Jedi trial depiction, then the third iteration, even earlier in the war, when even later legend sources tried to account for the changes in the Clone Wars. Then finally, we have the version we get in canon, where the timeline has to align with the Clone Wars as well, but the events are still at least heavily inspired by the micro-series depiction, so this canon version actually aligns most with the late Legends version. The difficulty here is that there is always the chance that a new piece of media will directly depict the knighting, since that hasn't actually happened yet in any specific canon media. It's just something that gets referenced. All of this effort went into Anakin's knighthood just for him to throw it away and become a Sith. What a tragedy, or a waste, as Vergere might say. And we'll talk about that in, I think, our next video. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Remember to leave a like and subscribe for more if so, and I hope to see you next time.